And for more, I want to welcome now Jason Beardsley. He is the Executive Director of the Association of the U.S. Navy. Welcome. I want to start with the questions I posed at the beginning. This is America's longest war. It came at a tremendous cost. I want to put those questions to you. What have we accomplished, and what are the consequences of leaving?
Well, thank you, first of all, Rudabe, for having me. It's a pointed question, and the first thing we should recognize is what spokesperson Kirby said, which is our men and women who are on the ground, deployed back-to-back to Afghanistan, did an amazing job. They answered the call when the country asked for it, and they lived up to that duty honorably. Where the real question lies is, what did the political leadership and the military leadership envisage for goals that were on the ground that the American soldier or the American service member could attain? And because we never heard what those goals were, we can't lay that on the troops. They did their job tremendously. What we have to do is look at the lack of creativity out of Washington, D.C., where for 20 years, we put men and women in harm's way without a real purpose at the end of that. So now we're faced with the consequence that this looks like not as much a loss as much as a long-term disaster. But make no mistakes, people saw this coming for a long time.
So the Taliban has captured now more than a dozen provincial capitals in just the past week. It looks like they'll soon be taking Kabul. They've already taken Kandahar. What does it mean that the Taliban has gained so much ground so quickly? And are we just going to be back where we started?
Yeah, they gained ground quickly because it's a little bit of understanding the tactics on the terrain. These are very rural areas around the provinces in the western and the southern portions of Afghanistan. It's rugged terrain. The cities are not occupied. They're not massive outposts, or we don't have a huge government presence from Afghanistan there. So when you hear that these provinces are falling and the capitals are falling, that is to be expected. These are not massive strategic military goals as much as they are a demonstration of how much the Afghanistan government has not truly unified this country in the last 20 years. You had an amazing opening that describes the long process of how we got here, which is rural terrain, balkanized states, factional people on the ground, and they're separated by far. So Ashraf Ghani, the president of Afghanistan, has a very, very tall task ahead of him. And you hear the spokesperson on the U.S. side indicating what U.S. policy is, which is we're shifting the burdens to the Afghanistan government.
Well, many of the provincial capitals may not be urban centers, but Kandahar and Kabul are very strategically important economically.
Oh, absolutely. They are. And there's no doubt that they will present a challenge to the Taliban. But we cannot expect that the government that has not unified for the last 20 years, we can't expect that the forces that have not stood their ground for the last 20 years will sort of magically stand their ground now. Our soldiers and sailors, service members, Marines, airmen, have come back from Afghanistan for 18, 19, 20 years and told us this story. So the real shame here is who's not listening, and why aren't the political leaders, the military leaders, adapting to the current conditions on the ground, or the previous conditions? That puts us in a bad situation. But again, we have to celebrate what our men and women did because they lived honorably and they'll do it again. What we really have to ask is for clarity and decision-making that are clear for the military to achieve a real objective.
Of course, no one's taking anything away from the troops here. We're just asking, really important questions in terms of foreign policy. So this is the so-called forever war, right? It's plagued 4 different administrations, both Democrat and Republican. In your view, was there a turning point here?
I think there was a turning point, or maybe there were many, right, on the ground when we made a decision to clear objectives and to take terrain back in the early days. We did that well. The turning point might be when we ceded that objective, the military tactics on the ground, to a larger purpose that was a little bit vague and aimless, which is something like nation building or settling the region. We never really got to that because the military doesn't do that. The military is there to really bring violence to the enemy and create a victory situation. It's then belonged to the State Department and others to kind of wrangle down how does a government stand up. That's nothing we were ever going to see the military do. So every time we saw once there were tactical successes or victories, what they should have been followed by was a declaration. And then if we wanted to hold ground there to police or to do something else, the leadership, the presidents, the generals should have been clear about that. So we really have to look to them. Congress has been operating under the authorized use of military force, the AUMF, that was written back in 2001. So we're still operating off old documents. We need to hold congressmen accountable. We need to hold our presidents accountable.
All right, Jason Beardsley, we appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
The U.S. is now working to help get American allies out of Afghanistan. Those allies include interpreters who helped the Americans communicate with their Afghan partners. Joining us now is Ahmadullah Siddiqui. He was an interpreter in Afghanistan. He is now the program manager with No One Left Behind. That's a nonprofit that works to help interpreters and other wartime allies. Mr. Siddiqui, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you were an interpreter yourself. What went into the decision to help the U.S. at such great risk to yourself and your family? And do you think the U.S. government will keep its promise to all of those they made promises to in Afghanistan who agreed to help in the effort?
Well, at some points, yes, they kept their promise, but for most of the time, no. They are still trying to keep the promise, but they haven't been able to. As you all know, the fear of Taliban retaliation is being felt intensively across the country, while the U.S. will withdraw its forces completely by September and will leave thousands of Afghans behind. We know that there are some people who are coming, and more than 10,000 applicants still waiting for their visas. We don't know, what will happen to them.
And everyone under the age of 20, it's really mind-blowing when you think of it. Everyone in Afghanistan under the age of 20 has only known war. It's obviously a very different language, a different culture here. When they come to the U.S., what are the biggest obstacles they face in terms of getting assimilated, finding work, getting into the education system, et cetera? What was your experience like, for example?
Yes, high expectations first, cultural shock for those under the age of 20. The environment, the job search, the transportation is totally different here, and many more. And so what I would, suggest them get out of their comfort zone and work and make connections. Then they will be able to get help and to get used to all these.
And you mentioned about 2,500 Afghan evacuees are set to arrive in this first wave. Roughly 20,000 are seeking visas by the September 11th withdrawal deadline. That does not seem likely to happen. Correct me if I'm wrong. What happens to those left behind, and what happens to the family members of those who do make it here?
So, yes, 2,500 applicants are here, and they said that more than 2,500 more will be by the end of August. And the rest who are waiting for their visas, they will be relocating to the third countries, one of the U.S. territories. But we still don't know. Most of the people, they keep calling us, they emailing us and ask for their the status of their visas. And all these threats and violence enforced upon our allies back in Afghanistan will document it. And at least we have, 300 interpreters have been killed since 2016. And that number grew up by the time.
Ahmadullah Siddiqui, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks.